Kia ora. For Eyewitness and RNZ, I'm Justin Gregory. Contrary to popular belief, All Black Buck Shelford did not lose a testicle while playing a rugby test match against France. But Colin Pinetree Meads really did play almost an entire game with a broken arm. This moment of legendary toughness, or madness, take your pick, happened in 1970 when the All Blacks were in South Africa playing warm-up games ahead of the Test series. South African rugby chief Danie Craven had expressed the hope that the provincial teams would soften up the All Blacks for the Springboks. The New Zealanders' next game was against cellar-dwellers Eastern Transvaal, a team they didn't know that much about. But halfback Sid Going tells me that the All Blacks knew right from the first whistle that they were in for a fight.
Oh, absolutely. Every tackle was a physical tackle. They ran into you hard.
And that's how Captain Brian Lahore, later Sir Brian, remembers it as well.
Yeah, they were switched on all right, and they're very physical, and they weren't too worried about how they won or how they beat us. They were about to do that, come hell or high water. The rucks and mauls, they were pretty brutal, yeah.
Because in those days, the rucking was more prominent. So if you put a guy on the deck, you would go over top of them with the boots and all, not kicking, but rucking.
Clearly, they weren't worried about who was on the ground when they came at you. I can't recall, it being absolutely dirty, but it was pretty physical. The line for me has always been, if you get kicked on the ground or somebody has a crack at your head, those sort of things for me are no-no.
Our response was, we're going to give them everything we've got. There's no way we were going to back off.
The All Blacks had never won a series in South Africa. This was their first tour there since 1960, when the Republic's racist apartheid laws prevented Maori players from being selected, sparking the No Maoris, No Tour protest movement back home. 7 years later, the New Zealand Rugby Union refused an invitation to send another whites-only team. But by 1970, a compromise acceptable to some had been reached, and players like Sid Going were permitted entry to South Africa as honorary whites. Amidst protest at home, the All Blacks left for the tour. Sid Going, for one, believed that they would win.
We never went thinking that we couldn't win, but we knew it was going to be a difficult one. We definitely went there with the intention of winning.
Brian Lahore was less convinced.
I don't think we were ever expected to win. It hadn't happened previously, but we had a pretty good side, and were expected to make a pretty good showing and during the series. And I thought, probably before I left, I felt, it was 50-50.
The All Blacks won all of their warm-up games and were feeling confident ahead of the looming first test. While the Eastern Transvaal tactics were challenging, First 5/8 Earl Curtin says the ABs had a plan to cope.
There was a pact between the forwards and the backs in a sense, and it was part of the team angle and spirit. But the forwards said that they would cover up the back. You hang on to the ball, boys, and the backs. You backs hang on to the ball. We'll get there. And we were getting hell knocked out of us. And there were boots flying everywhere on the bottom of the rucks. And all I could remember him saying was, he said to me, SH, he said, yes, he says, it's like duck shooting season down here. He says, it's all over the bloody place.
Curtin says what happened next was partly his fault.
So I went down on the ball. He said, oh, cover you up, Conchi. And then I heard a whack, and someone had booted his arm where he had his arms around me, hugging me almost on the ground to cover me up.
An X-ray would later show a complete break close to the wrist in Meads' lower left arm.
He got up after it, and I said, heavens, that was a whack. He said, I got booted in the arm. He said, I can't feel my fingers. And I said, sugar. Heavens. Oh, shit, Pinetree, but you haven't broken it, have you? And he said, well, I don't know. I said, well, is it numb? I said, well, maybe you've hit the funny bone. I wouldn't worry about it yet. See if it starts to come right. And if it doesn't, I said, we're in trouble. And with that, the great man played on.
And 4 decades of debate about whether the kick was intentional or not began. Many felt that Meads was targeted by the opposing team. Sir Brian is diplomatic.
How do you tell whether it was accidental or on purpose? But I assume that they knew whose arm it was. But, I didn't see the incident.
It probably was a deliberate kick, but there's no way of proving that, you just got on with it.
The carnage continued. 12 All Blacks in total would be injured, including Sid Going. Brian Lahore went into the game with a broken hand and came out with something more.
Oh, I got a broken nose as well, I think, that particular day. It was pretty brutal, yeah. They obviously set out to disrupt us, and they thought that was the way to do it.
Well, I think they were sent out to make sure that they knocked a few guys around. A Pinetree copped the boot that might have got me, and they were going to sort of make sure that test players got roughed up a bit. I mean, it's always been the South African way. And I mean, you accept that. It's part of the competition, and you respect them. They're mad keen on their rugby, and they love it.
I back my players against anybody. If they want to play that way, well, we can deal with that, but we'd never stoop to the level of, booting somebody on the ground. But it didn't do a lot for Colin's, next week or two.
After 20 minutes, Colin Meads went to the sideline for help. The doctor who inspected his arm said he thought it might be a pinched nerve. Meads went back onto the field, but Sid Going knew he wasn't right.
He was hampered because he couldn't use that arm. He couldn't use it as a leverage. He couldn't use it as a ball winner. He played most of that game with it up against himself. He thought, and probably the coaches thought at the time, well, you're better running around there doing something. You might get somebody's throat. Might be able to use one hand to pull somebody down. It's quite stupid, really.
Earl Curtin says no one had the time to notice how anyone else was getting on.
Everyone's so busy doing your own job, and then when you do have when you are going well, that is, the team's going well, you might have enough time to have a look and see what's going on and who else is of good value or who's doing a bit of the hard yards and playing well, and then you sort of have an appreciation of it afterwards. But in the heat of the moment, you don't have too much time to sort of think about it, because you're worrying about making sure that you're performing well yourself, and then the team will go well. For the sake of the team, he'd sort of battle on and he'd think, oh, well, should we right? Because he's so tough. I mean, most things with him always were right.
The rules had recently changed, and Meads could have gone off and been replaced. It was Captain Brian Lahore's call, and he says if he'd known the arm was broken, Meads would have been off like a shot.
Oh, true, absolutely. If we'd known how serious it was, he'd have been gone. We didn't have a tour doctor with us. We had to take, there may have been a doctor on the sideline, but he wasn't our doctor. So, and that was a distinct disadvantage when you had injury in the camp, to have your own doctor and be able to monitor its progress, is pretty important. And that's why now they have their own massage man, a physio, a doctor. That's 3 medical people involved with the teams now. We had none. We didn't want him to go off, obviously. He was a very important member of our side. And
did he want to go off?
Pinetree never wants to go off, no.
In the end, Colin Meads played more than 70 minutes with a fractured forearm, and the All Blacks won 24-3. Legend has it that when a doctor confirmed the break, Pinetree said, "At least we won the bloody game." But while Eastern Transvaal lost the battle, they might have done enough to win the war. Colin Meads was out of the first test, and Sid Going says the loss was huge.
Well, it was a big blow for the team. He was our dominant man. That was likely to be his last, probably, tour.
Earl Curtin firmly believes that Meads had to get right for the remaining tests, and as soon as possible.
But he was too important not to play, so he bravely battled on through the rest of the tour with a cast around his arm. Now, some said he shouldn't have, and some said he should have. Well, it was really down to the man and the fact that he was a wonderful attribute for the team. So we did they feared him and they respected him, the South Africans, and so he needed almost to take the field for that reason alone. And the same could be said, too, of Murdoch in the last test when he had appendicitis. Pinetree told him that he could not play.
Meads missed the first 2 tests, which were shared 1-1. Wearing a protective shield on his forearm, he returned for the last 2, but New Zealand lost them both and the series as well. So was the Meads injury the reason the tour was unsuccessful? Brian Lahore says no.
We just had bad games on critical days. We seemed to save our poor performances for the test matches, and particularly the 3rd test. We played poorly. And I'm not going to blame any particular players. I think there was quite a few of us that didn't play to the level that we should have. Most of the provincial teams that we played, and none of them really worried us a great deal. But put on a green jersey, and they were different people. They played very well in that first test and deservedly won that. The second test we should have won by quite a considerable score because we did play better than them, but again it was reasonably close. And the third test we played poorly, and the fourth test the ball would not bounce for us. We so many times had the line open and one to beat, and the ball would bounce into his hand instead of three or four other guys that were there. So that was really the ball game.
Colin Meads went on to play for the All Blacks until 1971. He returned to South Africa as coach of the Rebel Cavaliers tour in 1986 and later accepted a knighthood. His courage in playing on with a broken arm has gone into All Black lore and legend, while the rights and wrongs of the incident will continue to be debated. But as Pinetree himself said, what isn't up for debate is the result. They won the bloody game. You've been listening to Eyewitness on RNZ National. If you enjoyed this story, please write a review or rate us on iTunes. You can subscribe or listen to every Eyewitness podcast on iTunes or at radionz.co.nz/series. And while you're there, we'd invite you to dip into any of the other RNZ podcasts. Eyewitness was written and presented by me, Justin Gregory, and engineered by Tony Stamp. Ka kite anō.